conversation came about today because of Apartmentalize. Adrian and I were walking around. I think he was in the Godfather makeup or get up, and we're talking about topics for the leadership council. And I brought up that I think there's a lot of, I don't know, curiosity about what's happening in uh, the regulatory space and the regulation world. And what what I kind of mentioned to him is that there is a lot of both good information and then some challenging information that we're seeing um, that are affecting multifamily. And I got to thinking about it like a radar, to where there's some information that is really, really close in that we need to be aware of. And then, just like a radar, the farther away you get, the more warning we have. And I came up with four topics since we've got limited time and to have a conversation about. These four items begin up close, like what's happening now or what already happened. And then we look further and further out to where we end up talking 2 and 3 years from now. But these are big enough changes for multifamily that I really think we have to begin paying attention to them. And it starts, the up close is that very recently, a lot of us received an email from the largest EPA 608 provider in the country, which is HVAC Excellence, part of ESCO Group, that talked about changes that are coming to 608. And that email, the headline, if you only read the headline, it was a little bit deceptive. And we'll talk about that. We're also going to look at what's a little bit further out, and that is the AIM Act and how that has had a recent update that affects us for the rest of this year. And then we'll be looking at gas furnaces, an update that's coming in 2028, and what I think is possibly the biggest update that we've got to be aware of, and that's the Department of Energy and what it's doing in 2029. So to start out with, oh, by the way, anybody, if you want a copy of this presentation, it's got notes and links on it. Please reach out through LinkedIn. I'll be happy to send it to you. Just DM me there, and happy to send it to you and answer any questions that I can, or find out any information for you that I can. It's all public information anyway, so nothing's top secret here. So where we begin, or where we're going to start looking at, is EPA 608. And the biggest reassurance for us and for our industry, and as a matter of fact, air conditioning and refrigerant at large, is nothing is changing. Nothing. The requirements are still the same. Yes, there's still a fine. Yes, you have to recover and reclaim. All of the same rules and regulations are still in effect. It's not going away. If they add something to it, that could occur at any time. But as of today, 2026, there are no more regulations that are being added to the basic EPA 608 certification. What is potentially changing is the curriculum and the way that it's being taught. In other words, there is a chance that the EPA is going to approve a updated test where they change a period, some punctuation, some questions, how the test is administered, but the actual certification is not changing. The material, the study guides, those will stay the same, except updated changes, possibly some new pictures, a different PowerPoint, that information. To kind of summarize the important parts for us for 608, R22 is gone. Those equipment where that equipment we are still using in the field. I was traveling and drove through some properties last week out in Utah that still had R22 equipment that was in use. And out of curiosity, I pulled it up. You can still purchase virgin R22 from suppliers. And the price is now going down on what you can buy because equipment is disappearing. So the law of supply and demand economics is taking an effect. Demand is beginning to decrease. The supply is essentially stagnant, which means that supply houses don't want to still have those green jugs of R22 that they end up selling. Couple of things that we've got to be aware of from a service standpoint. We never were supposed to, and we are not ever supposed to top off any refrigerant. Do not mix refrigerant in a system. Yes, I know that the box on the side of it says drop in. That means remove the 22 or whatever refrigerant you've got and drop this in place without major updates to the system. That's what is meant by drop in. It does not mean top off. Do not mix refrigerant. That is still the same. One big thing that we need to focus on, especially for EPA 608 and the AIM Act, which we'll talk about here in a moment, is we've got to reclaim refrigerant. The AIM Act went into effect in 2020. It deals with the equipment that now has to use a refrigerant of a lower global warming potential. What that means is R410A is decreasing. It is phasing down as a part of EPA 608. R410A will begin to decrease. Where this affects 608, older equipment, older systems, we can still get parts for. Continue to repair it. You do not have to change to an A2L or a new system under the AIM Act. Again, there's no new changes under 608. That rule is still in effect. Now, what has changed is the AIM Act. One very small piece of the AIM Act went into effect January of this year. In January of this year, it became illegal to install legacy R410A equipment if you had it. That just changed within the past 60 days or so from ago. And what that change was is now if the warehouse, any of our suppliers, if they have R410A equipment that fits your use, buy it, install it. It is now legal. You can do that. Originally, the plan was that R410A equipment would stop production in January of 2025. And we had to install everything. In other words, the suppliers could sell through what they had, and it had to be installed before January 1 of 2026. The AIM Act, they went through and have revised that to where now, as long as R410A equipment, full systems or condensing units, evaporator coils are available, you are legally able to install it. That means we can now buy out whatever supplier you use. If they've got it, if it fits, install it. That is a good thing to do. This doesn't change the fact that we've got to reclaim refrigerant. R410A does not have a drop-in. In other words, the R410A systems that we have on our properties that we're using, once that R410A phase down causes the price of R410A to go high enough that we no longer want to repair those systems, you have to change the system. Newer refrigerants will not work in R410A systems. This means that if you purchase R32 or R454B, which are the two lower global warming potential refrigerants that are available, they cannot be used in an R410A system. It will not work according to manufacturer standards. The reason why reclamation is so important is because our current 608 enforcement says that global warming must be honored. In other words, the refrigerant and systems that we install have to contain less than 700 global warming potential. For that, we have two, R32 and 454B. Those two refrigerants will be able to be produced, but at decreasing levels. And the reason why I say decreasing levels is how the bank or battery of refrigerant manufacturing is able to happen. In short, R410A is phasing down all the way down until mid 2030s. It's phasing down. It will not ever go out of production, but law of supply and demand is going to take over. As demand decreases, or as supply decreases, demand is going to go up and the price will go up because of it. And that's by design. Reclaim R410A. And this, I don't think we can stress enough. On our properties, if in your shop you go in and you have recovery tanks of any kind of refrigerant, turn them in. Suppliers, reclamation facilities, chemical plants, they will buy reclaimed refrigerant from you, even if it's mixed, even if it's burnt out, even if you don't know what's in that jug. They will buy them. The companies that I'm aware of are A-Gas, Hudson, I think it's Diversified. There are a couple other companies that are out there that will purchase the old refrigerant that our technicians don't know. If you go in the back of your shop, chances are in the way, way back of that closet back there, there are recovery jugs that you don't know what's in them. Fine. Get rid of them. Chances are the tanks are out of date anyway, so it's unsafe to keep them there. Be sure that we reclaim it. And the reason why is all reclaimed gas doesn't fall under manufacturer mandates. In other words, if there is a limit on the amount of virgin refrigerant that can be manufactured, that limit does not apply to the reclaimed refrigerant. And just a side note, A2Ls, which are those low global warming refrigerants that are available, A2Ls aren't the end. HVAC Excellence just released an A3 education program to teach non-poisonous, highly flammable refrigerants. Yeah, we're talking about propane. Those systems are in use over in Europe right now. They are not per code yet in the US, but they're coming, because if we want to get even lower global warming potential, we have to go to an A3. So that's what's happening next. Before I continue and go on even further out, anybody have any questions or thoughts that we should go over and talk about?
Well, we should probably mention here to the group, if you all have questions, you could always drop them in a chat box or use the hand raise option, like the little emoji. so we could see you, and then Paul, I'm sure he's happy to, stop and address any questions, right? Want to make it as interactive as possible. And if I was to speak, right, if I don't get a question out, by the time Paul finishes, I'm gonna forget my question. So I'm gonna want to get it out. So
Well, Adrian, since nobody has one right now, are you hearing anything through your suppliers and people that are talking to you about this, like concerns from vendors or contractors that you're talking to?
no, actually, this is like new conversation, right? This is new to me, and I'm not hearing a lot of conversations out there. Actually, I'm not hearing any conversations also. I think it's very timely, and thank you for sharing this stuff. By the way, the recording is gonna go on our YouTube channel, so I'll also encourage you all to like share with your teams and everything, because it's great information that it doesn't seem to be penetrating like at scale, right? Not to say that this is the first one. I'm just not aware of conversations like this. So yeah, this is very valuable. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then we'll continue to look at even further out. And this is where I think we've got to really begin to pay attention to what's happening. And that is that in December 18th, 2028, uh, all furnaces residential gas furnaces have to meet an AFUE standard of greater than 95% efficient. What that means in simple terms is that if you take an electric furnace, the amount of heat that is produced per the amount of energy that goes in is 100% efficient in an electric furnace. In other words, every bit of heat that an electric furnace produces goes into the house or goes into the living space. There's nothing lost to venting. Because a gas furnace requires venting, since combustion produces carbon monoxide, aldehydes, and other exhaust gases, there will always be some heat that goes up the stack, goes out the vent. Currently, we have 85 to 90% standard, and in our equipments, our existing equipment, we may even have less than that. And what that translates to is that of all the heat that a gas furnace produces, 90% of it in a 90% furnace goes into the living space. 10% of the heat that's produced goes out the vent, is carried with the exhaust. In 2028, what changes is there's a minimum standard for all new furnaces. Now, why this is such a big deal for us in multifamily, especially for those of us who have older buildings, is that in order to get to a 95% furnace, you are required to have a condensing furnace. And what that means is that you will remove enough heat from the vent gas, the exhaust that comes off of that furnace, that any moisture that is produced in combustion will come out of vapor state. It will condense onto the walls of the chimney, the draft, the furnace. And what makes this so problematic for us is if we think about our old buildings, if you have a 2 or a 3-story building that you've got furnaces that all go into a standard vent, double wall or triple wall vent that goes through the floors and the ceilings upstairs, you cannot install a condensing furnace on that chimney. Not only that, it can't even be mixed. This means for our older buildings, if this regulation stays into place, for our older buildings, not only are we going to have to change the entire furnace, we have to run a separate exhaust line out the roof or the side of the building. It will be PVC or plastic of some type, because remember, you're removing 95% of the heat. The temperature of the exhaust will be low enough, and you will need to have a plastic, non-corrosive material that carries that vent gas out of your living space. This is a huge change. Our buildings are going to be in some major retrofit. I think we're going to have to come up with some different ways to vent out. Some of us may have to move furnaces to outdoor closets so we can vent them directly out the back. Pay attention to your local code and what's happening with it. We can't mix those vents together. This could mean some major changes to our floor plan. Just in basics, we're going to have to deal with clearance, space around the unit. This is definitely going to mean that our training on site is going to have to change. Not only that, a lot of these newer units are no longer using voltage thermostats, meaning that you turn things on and off through the presence or absence of voltage. Instead, they're using digital communicating thermostats. That means maintenance technicians, we've got to begin paying attention to the golden rule of maintenance, which is RTFI. Read the full instructions. Yes, every bit of the word of the instructions is going to be required for us to begin servicing and working on this unit. These units, they're coming. December 2028. That's little over 2 years from now. I think it's a good idea for us to begin getting in good with not only our supplier representative, whatever company you're using as a supplier to deliver stuff to your property, it might be a good idea to get in good with your manufacturers. For those of us in a colder market, it would be really good to get to know if you're using Goodman, Daikin, Rheem, Carrier. This is in trouble. Oh, Jonathan, that's a good point that we're already, Canada's already seeing that. Yeah, towards condensing furnaces. This is something that's coming in, and our next regulation that is on the books headed for here in the States is even more potentially challenging. The nice thing about gas furnaces is they frequently work because they've already got the space around them to make it happen. The next change, we could be in trouble. And that's the fact that water heaters, all electric water heaters over 35 gallons are going to heat pumps. Take that in for a second. Those of us on our properties that have a water heater installed above a dryer, heat pumps won't fit. The heat pump water heater. Right now, there is not a product on the market. Granted, we've got roughly 3 years between now and then. And technology is great. Innovation is wonderful. But the reality is, as it is today, there is not a water heater product manufactured that fits the parameters for the way our buildings were designed. I can remember working properties that I had the 50-gallon lowboy water heater installed underneath the heat pump. Now, it won't work. We have to move the water heater or the furnace, or we will face the challenge on our older properties. And Vinny, you're exactly right. If we've got a value add property, if we're looking to renovate, this now comes into play for all of our renovation product. This is massive. I can't even begin to express the change and how this is going to happen. If your community, and Scott, great reminder, if you are headed for budgeting, it might be a good idea to begin factoring in when we look at renovating, when we look at products. One of the earliest properties I worked at, the most unique thing was we had a 40-gallon lowboy electric water heater in the corner of the kitchen. So you had that countertop that went down, the kitchen sink was here, and in the very corner, that cabinet where you had that empty space, there was a 40-gallon lowboy. In order to replace the water heater, we had to go in through the breezeway. We had to cut a hole in the side of the breezeway to pull the cabinet out, or to pull the water heater out, because it was cheaper than taking all the cabinets out just to get access to work on it. Those will have to go away. If a water heater if a water heater has to be replaced, they'll go away. And these changes affect all electric water heaters. Below 35 gallons, we're limited now to the maximum temperature at the water heater we can have is 135 degrees. That might mean a problem if your building has insulation issues, or has a long run to where you lose enough heat that you can't get the water hot enough at the point of use. The point of use temperature doesn't change. What does change is the temperature that the water heater produces at its site. Jonathan makes a mention of the permitting alone. Yeah, it's gonna be wild. I think one of the unintended consequences of this is we as an industry are going to be doing less water heater installs, because we got to get a plumber in to permit and do it, let alone the potential. And I haven't done a lot of research into it, but there's a potential that we have to deal with an electrical change in code, wiring, access, and various needs for that. Vinny asks a question of, what about tankless? At this point, there are no changes in the regulation environment regarding tankless water heaters. I'm a big fan. Those are fantastic. But the tanked water heaters that we have, boy, it's going to be interesting. Gas water heaters aren't exempt from the rule either. To our gas water heaters, if it's a 20 to 55 gallon water heater, it will require a damper. These are going to eventually go to condensing water heaters as well, which those carry the same rules as the condensing furnaces. In other words, we have to have plastic venting. It can't be vented the same way or in the same spaces as our standard gas water heaters that are coming. All of these changes are coming in strong, and they're gonna happen at some point. Matter of fact, there are already states that are ahead at the municipal level. I was just reading an article this morning about that New York and California have both gone into combustion rules, to where they're removing gas appliances in all new construction. That's going to have a trickle-down effect, because if new construction isn't getting gas installed, that means manufacturers are going to be making less. The demand is down because the supply begins to decrease. Those of us for the next 3 years that want to use gas appliances in new construction or new build, in areas of country where it's allowed, that's going to have an effect on the price that we end up paying and what we end up doing. All of this, in my opinion, does go to the fact that we've got to be educating our technicians, not only on rules and regulations. I mean, that the rules and regulations, in all honesty, that's an easy thing to talk about. But what it changes for us is we have to be training our technicians in the critical thinking skills that they need to have in order to deal with changes as they come along in our individual municipalities. That's a lot of stuff. And there is even more implications that I haven't thought of yet. And I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a government official. I'm just nerdy enough for this stuff to pay attention to. So what do y'all think?
Well, do you see us continue to outsource these replacements, or like is this becoming a contractor play exclusively with the new regulations and new changes, especially for like the furnaces and the water heaters? It sounds from what you described that this is a very complex operation. Not only that, we're lacking personnel, right? The personnel that we have to take them from like where they are today to like train them to do these complex operations, it's a stretch, right? And we have a question from after that we have a question from Rick.
I think there's two parts to your question or your statement. The first is the direct answer, yes. I think when we begin to get into venting issues, more and more, like somebody brought up the permitting need, we are going to need inspections for our buildings from a municipal standpoint. We will require more permitting and more licensing in order to have that happen. Right now, many of the states, as long as we're doing like in kind replacement of same size, same BTU ratings, same dimensions, a maintenance tech can take it out and put it back in because by and large you're using the same connections, the same things that we end up doing. Going forward, when we add that venting into it, yes, I think we're going to end up having our vendors and contractors that we lean on more heavily to do those type of repairs. But the second piece of that, in my mind, that can lead to a problem, and that is with our on-site teams if they respond I'm going to say incorrectly, different than the way my thinking is. There's two responses on their hand. One response is, well, a vendor does that, therefore I don't need to pay attention to it anymore. Therefore, I trust somebody else completely and totally. I'm not worried about it at all. I think that's the wrong answer. In my opinion, the correct answer, as someone who I don't have any of those licenses or the ability to do those things, I still want to know, because if I'm hiring a vendor to do that work, I need to know what the expectation of that vendor is so I can double check before I pay the invoice that they completely did the job per manufacturer standards. And that's the response that I want our maintenance technicians to have. And I would love for our management companies to support and actually make that a part of the responsibility. Um, I think that was your answer. But go ahead, Mr. Rick, come off of mute and what you got?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I just want to say I'm glad we're talking about this. This is the second time I have heard both of these message literally in the last 4 days. So like I love your radar analogy. This is coming like a battleship over the horizon right now. This is my question though, and with all respect to whoever's put it together, and it's nobody on this Zoom, but I can't say that I think these regulations have been well thought out or thought out to the end. And with respect to the retrofit activity that they will cause, it is going to be so substantial. And under the guise of grandfathering into current code and legislators later in the next few years finding out the amount of work and the physical impossibilities that they have put ahead of us. What do you think the propensity is for some change and modifications to what we're talking about and worried about today?
Uh, Full disclaimer, I don't know. And I don't have the magic 8 ball. I would love to have that future, the magic toilet plunger, I think is what we need to have for our industry. But I don't have it. Talking to EPA officials and in government officials, right now, we, multifamily and even in construction of and working on old buildings, are in the minority. The majority, in other words, the viewpoint that a lot of these regulations are made is that we've got to conserve energy, because there is a ceiling on the amount of energy that we can produce. There is a manner of politics that are involved, and we're not getting into it here for whatever that background is. But the reality is, right now, the biggest push is on energy conservation. It is to a little bit lesser extent on exhaust and air pollution, but those have a bigger lobby from a politicking standpoint. They have a bigger lobby than our real estate dealing with existing buildings lobby and area. And I think the statistic that I remember seeing from weareapartments.com is that a full 40% of our buildings that we currently have in the rental market in the US are buildings that were built prior to 1980. So all of that taken into account, we're going to have to, it's in some form, it's going to happen. They may relax it. I can say that it's my understanding that the grandfathering word is now out of vogue. In other words, the likelihood that there will be eligible for grandfathering is minimal. If so, it will be done on a state by state basis, but the federal rule will still be in effect, because that's where these are: is Department of Energy, EPA, and other federal agencies. Did I answer your question? I hope. I don't
No,
think I turned into a
well,
politician.
no. Well, yes and no. I think the point is the answer is not out there yet. But I also saw you got a lot of questions on the text thread. I'll yield to those now. Thank you.
You got it.
We have a couple of very interesting comments from Joel. Joel, do you want to like go live? Just go off mute and kind of make those points.
Sure, I can. We'll go with the point and then the question. So, to kind of go off of what you were saying, Paul, on the training side, I think where it's really valuable, unfortunately, we are going to have to contract a lot of this stuff out, especially when we're talking about, just these substantial changes. But it's really extending the life of our current equipment. Is where a lack of training really hurts your budget. Right now, a lot of that can get hidden, but I mean, you might have several years in that condenser that gets thrown out the window when your service tech makes a repair on it and doesn't do a good vacuum, or puts in the wrong refrigerant, or thinks he can top off something that he can't. So I think that's really where we're going to see it. Right now, it's kind of hidden because, hey, that's 2,500 or so, or maybe historically, not even right now, but historically, maybe it's 2,500. We replace that condenser and that air handler. But now we're talking about drastically different numbers when they fail to make correct repairs because they don't know what they're doing. So I think that's where it's really going to help us. And then on the question side, I didn't get to type quick enough on the refrigerant portion, but I'm kind of curious if you have an opinion on it. So R54B, I've heard some suppliers really pushing it because of it having a little bit lower of a GWP versus R32. and that, kind of making it sound like it's going to have a much longer lifespan because of that. But I've also heard on the counter argument to that is that the kind of European standards, neither of them meet it. They're already much lower than either of those refrigerants, and so the next kind of wave is probably going to be lower than both of those numbers as well. So just curious if I've heard, I know, to your point, you're not a legislator, but have you, heard enough on that to having formed an opinion or any thoughts?
Yeah, the thoughts and opinions, I got plenty. Actual facts is the challenge, because to your point, yes, right now in the US there are two refrigerants we're doing. R454B, which has a drastically lower global warming potential than R32. Yes, there is talk and there are questions just based on the continual ratcheting down of global warming potential numbers. And I think it is a valid point to make that there is a drastic difference between, if I'm remembering correctly, 500 or 600 global warming potential that R32 has, and drastically lower that 454B has. However, I'm hearing more chatter or more articles or more conversations about the fact that really once you get below R32, you get into HFOs, which not only are you dealing then with global warming potential, you're dealing with PFAS, which R454, it has the lower global warming potential, but R454 is a mixture of R32 and 1234YF, or 1234YF. And the reason why that's an important thing to realize is that, all of these bans that are going on about single-use plastics, one of the reasons those bans are important is PFAS, which is forever chemicals. That means once they're manufactured and released into the environment, they're there forever. They don't deteriorate, they don't go away. And 454B contains that. Short-term studies show that it has a drastic effect, a detrimental effect on aquatic life, like in the oceans and stuff. So all of that goes to say that if global warming is the only thing that legislators and people are looking at, I agree with you. Why continue to use R32? The opposing theory, though, is that if we go with the better global warming numbers, we're causing issues that cannot be reversed. R32 with a higher global warming, it's in the air. It will eventually dissipate. It'll eventually go away. PFAS never does, never will. So that's a big, long way of saying, I don't know. I think at this point, to your point, and to reinforce what you said, we've got to be educating our maintenance techs. Best place to start, if we're looking for a place to begin teaching our maintenance technicians who are working on air conditioning equipment, is the ABCs. Airflow before charging. Do not take a jug out of your shop. Don't even get out your manifold gauge set until check the filter, check the fan blades, check the coils, both of them. And then, only then, evaluate if you have to get out refrigerant. Because the reality is this: if a technician, and this is not just for multifamily, this is for all contractors everywhere, if a technician accesses a system that is currently operating, there is a more likely chance that they will decrease the lifespan of that equipment than they will actually fix something by accessing the refrigerant. That's not to say that we don't need to be accessing the refrigerant, but it is to say that we've got to do the easy things before we get to the more complicated things like superheat, subcool, and dealing with the pressure temperature differential of whichever refrigerant we're going to end up going with. So thank you for bringing that up. We've got to be absolutely certain that our maintenance technicians are doing what should occur before the before accessing refrigerant. And Jonathan, thank you for the reminder that I continue to add common sense to something that quite frequently we don't have. But I had a teacher one time tell me that if common sense were more common, we'd never talk about it.
True. So true. That was a smart teacher. Another comment, great comment from David. Paul, I want you to take a few moments to kind of wait on it, because I think I have some thoughts there, but I think it's interesting to just kind of go over and share a couple of thoughts there.
Yeah, and there is a push, and David is talking about that Seattle and there are other places. It's not just Washington State. They're pushing to decrease the amount of combustion in use all over, for multiple reasons. I think the biggest reason I'm seeing is pollution, the increase in carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, aldehydes, and other exhaust gases that end up being released whenever you burn gas. The reality, though, is that per amount of energy input, there is a higher heat production from combustion than there is per unit of electrical energy that goes in. So, from an energy standpoint, gas wins, especially when we talk about cost. The flip side of that, though, from a pollution, from an environmental standpoint, electric wins, because while our electricity still by and large is produced by combustion through natural gas or coal plants or those sorts of things, that occurrence, that burning is happening in one location at the power plant, where they can mitigate, they can deal with that environmental infusion. So all of that goes in to say, yes, there is a general move away from combustion heat. And we're very fortunate in our country to be technologically advanced to take advantage of these efficiency systems. One of the big things to point out, and it's not realized, is these electric water heaters that we're going to have a 4-to-1 heat production ratio. In other words, if you deal with just a standard heat strip, every amount of energy that comes in, you are receiving every watt of energy that comes into that heat strip produces 1 unit of heat energy. It is a 100% efficiency, 1-to-1 ratio. A heat pump water heater is a 4-to-1 ratio. For every unit of heat energy that goes into a heat pump water heater, you get 4 units of heating energy out. That's the efficiency standard. And that's why we're changing to heat pump water heaters. It's the efficiency standard. I read an article yesterday. There is now a heat pump technology that's approved for production that's a 9 ratio. Every unit that goes in, 9 units of heat out to heat the water. So efficiency is not going away, and we have to do it, especially since we're building all these data centers everywhere for AI, and we have to have all the electricity for that, because we're going to be replaced by that soon anyway.
Paul, there was a comment earlier by Vinny, right, saying that we gotta educate the owners and corporate, and there's so much truth to this, right? Because I'm just thinking, beginning of this year, I started hearing conversations about the refrigerant change, right, to A to L. And this didn't happen overnight, but I'm hearing friends of mine and people that work on the ownership side that they're completely like blindsided, right? How come we didn't budget for this? And and I think if we've been around for, a couple of decades or more, like, you and I have been, we've seen this over and over again, right? So the question is, in your opinion, what are some things that we could do better on our side to kind of like get the word out when there's still time so people could properly prepare, ownership groups and management groups too? So
That's
on the next thing is not like such a
yeah.
sticker shock, right?
That is such a loaded question because it's the same. It's the same cycle. I mean, I my educational career began when I went to work for HD Supply in 2005. In 2007, we began talking about the efficiency change from 10 SEER to 13 SEER. And we started talking about that. And then the change to 410A happened in 2010 and 2011. And both of those situations, I was on the supplier side, and I'd go into these management companies and talking to the guys on site, doing the training that we're talking about doing for our maintenance technicians. They were all in of, yeah, this is what I got to do. This is the rules. This is the right way to do it. When I worked for HD Supply, I kind of began my corporate education when I built a class called R410A for executives. And it was fascinating to me that I was talking about what needed to happen to work on an R410A system that a technician needed to be doing different. And the only thing that executives at that time wanted to know is how long. In other words, we had R22 systems. How long are the changes going to take? Not what about the cost? What about the impact? And I'm from a supplier, so I couldn't speak very well other than putting the information on the board, and they had to interpret it. To answer your question, I think we have to not only get in those rooms where budgeting and where time management is talked about, we have to ask questions until we get an answer. We can't just accept the standards that are. An example of this is right now, 2026. We're dealing with a change from R410A to A2L refrigerants, A1 refrigerants to A2L refrigerants. And the change is that A2L refrigerants, you have to replace both sides of the system. At minimum, you have to replace the indoor coil and the outdoor coil, possibly the air handler as well, depending on your system. But here's the thing. I can remember talking and hearing at conferences and being with executives that were making plans back in 2025 for the budgets this year in 26, and they'd call the supplier and say, hey, what price expectation are you seeing for next year? And the answers the suppliers were coming back with was 8-9% increase, 10%, whatever their percentage increase was. But that was based on an apples to apples change out. Meaning, if you are replacing a 410A system, you could only replace the condensing unit and you were perfectly fine. Now, if you have to replace a unit, you didn't budget for it. You budgeted to only replace the outside. You did not budget to replace the inside and deal with the additional training and the additional time that those A2L systems are going to require. And who knows what's going to happen when we get to A3Ls. So I think the answer to your question in big, long-winded stuff, ask questions, keep asking questions, and pay attention. RTFI the whole way along.
Extremely informative, and thank you, Paul, for doing this for us all, and also for those that weren't present in a virtual room. I'm going to send a note to the entire group and actually I have a significantly large email list that I want to share this with, not just like maintenance leaders, but also executives in the industry, people that are in charge of budgets and everything. I'm gonna do a summary of our call, and also I'm gonna wait until we're able to like upload this on YouTube. And Paul, more than happy to like give a link out there where like, because I'm not sure how many answers you should expect, but my list is like 120,000 names.
Hey, I'll continue talking about this on Maintenance Mindset and Turnover podcasts. Anywhere, anybody that asks me questions, I'll answer them. If you want a copy of what we talked about, send me a DM and LinkedIn. That's the best place to do that. And that's awesome.
Yeah, happy to spread the word. I mean, this is like so critical for us all. And just because, you asked me, have I heard of this before? No, have I? No, have I? I have. Everybody very thankful for the presentation here. Thank you all for joining another meeting. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Please send me your favorite topics, and if you want to be a presenter, also send that my way so we could get you on a schedule, and we could get you in front of the group, and then we could spread the word. Once again, Paul Rhodes, many thanks, and looking forward to have you back soon,
And
as soon as possible.
I agree. Vinny, did you have a question? Were you trying to say something?
I was, yeah. I was just going to ask
Yeah,
before
please,
it
Vinny.
ended.
I don't mean to cut you
That's
off.
okay. I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no.
I just said
All good.
it's a unique question, but I mean, you might not have an answer, but I'm just curious because I worked on a property in New York and we had aquatherm systems.
Ooh.
And the closet was shared with a gas hot water tank. Now, my question is with these A2Ls and A3s that are going to be flammable or highly flammable, that's going to be another retrofit that we're going to have to look forward to changing, right? Because if that system is able to leak that refrigerant into that closet and you have a pilot light on, there's a possibility for something there as well. Now,
well,
go ahead.
There, to your point, though, you already have an even more flammable gas present, right?
Mhm.
You got natural gas.
Yes.
A2L is a lower flammability than natural gas that's present. So without seeing it, this is a blind comparison. Don't hold me to it. No promises. But my response is that whatever rules would be required for an A2L system are already in place because you got natural gas there.
Okay.
And that's way more flammable.
Am I correct in assuming that there's going to be some sort of sensors on these A2L systems that'll let it know will it shut everything down?
What I'm thinking is actually it doesn't shut everything down. It deals with dilution, meaning that's the primary reason why we have to install a new evaporating coil.
Yeah.
Because we have to have a sensor present. And if the sensor trips, meaning it detects refrigerant, it turns the indoor fan on to dilute the air going through it until it doesn't sense anymore. Then it shuts off for a time period, senses again, and if it doesn't sense, it'll go back into service. If it does sense again, it locks out with the fan on full 100% of the time until a repair is made.
Okay. Yeah, because it's an attached closet, but it's right behind the unit. The coil is literally 3 feet away from the hot water tank. And I was just worried that if there is a leak in that coil and it sprays out and then that room it's just going to combust. So that's what my fear was.
Full disclosure, yes, it is possible, but almost impossible. Okay. I mean, A2Ls honestly are that much different from an A1, but that quantity of difference is enough to take it over the threshold to hitting A2L, that's why the L designation was given, was low flammability.
And now we're already talking about A3s, so that's what I'm saying. So eventually it will become something possibly. Yeah. Okay.
It's called job security.
Yeah. All right.
Sometimes
Thank you.
it feels like it's too much job security.
I agree. Thanks, guys. We'll see
Thank you
y'all
all.
next
Thank you,
time.
gentlemen. Have a great afternoon. See you all in 2 weeks. And I promise to send the recording and the notes. And Paul, if you want to send me the the presentation that you put together, I could also do that and like send that with a mass email. It's up to you, whatever you want
Awesome.
to share. Okay.